Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being patient as we kind of waited for people to wander in. Welcome to the Young Professionals in Transportation's first collaborative West Coast regional event. This is titled Autonomous Vehicles and the Future of Urban Design. This is a joint effort between the new Northwest Regional District and the Southwest Regional District with support from YPT International. So I'm sure we all know this next part pretty well, as we all live in the virtual world as we have during the last couple of years. But we ask that you stay muted with your camera off. This isn't a webinar, unfortunately, but it is going to give us the opportunity to interact a little bit more. At the end, during the Q&A session, there may be an opportunity to ask questions through video and/or audio, but we'll kind of play that by ear. Throughout the discussion, feel free to ask questions in the chat, which we will monitor throughout. So to give some introductions, I am John Larson Friend, he, him pronouns. I'm the Vice Chair for YPT Seattle and the Regional Deputy Director of Membership for YPT's new Northwest Regional District. We also have here today with us Eddie Isaacs, the Chair for YPT Los Angeles. And actually I'll add a pin for him just to see his face. He is the Deputy Regional Director of Membership for YPT Southwest Regional District. Hi, Eddie.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, a little issue getting into the Zoom, but at least I got in now. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. All right, I'll go back to me. So a little bit of background before we get into the topic. So these regional districts are new for us. Their purpose is to support YPT's value to members, its growth, and impact on the transportation community. Before we had YPT National, which is now international with the expansion to Europe, and then the local chapters. Now the regional districts will help support and grow local chapters and hopefully plant new ones in new cities. If you are interested in getting involved with YPT on the regional level, go to ypttransportation.org to fill out the YPT Regional District Board of Directors interest form. It's really easy. I did it. It took me like maybe 5-10 minutes. And we would definitely love to have you aboard wherever region you're interested in. Also, if you are not a member of a local YPT chapter and would like to be, that information can also be found on the website as well. I think the last thing before we get into it is attendees will also have the chance to win one of 2 signed copies of Samuel Schwartz's book, No One at the Wheel. So that's pretty cool. Thank you to YPT International for providing that. So moving into the Q&A portion of the evening, I have some updates, which is they're a little sad, but that's okay. It's going to be fun anyway. So William Riggs, who is at University of California, San Francisco, he is unable to join the panel due to illness. He unfortunately tested positive for COVID and is apparently feeling that positivity, which is not great, but that's the world we live in at the moment. So we wish him a speedy recovery. And we also don't have Rima Griffith from Washington State Transportation Commission. She is unable to join us due to a family emergency and needing to be at the hospital with family. So yeah, but we do have 2 panelists with us this evening, which we're super excited to have them with us. First, we have Marissa Walker. She is the Senior Vice President. Let me pin you. There you go. She is the Senior Vice President, Infrastructure and Executive Director at the Institute of Automated Mobility at Arizona Commerce Authority. Tripping over my words already. We've already just started. And then we also have Ariel Fleischer. I didn't actually ask her last name. I hope that's correct. And she, great. She is the city policy strategist at Waymo. So I'm going to hand it over to Marissa first to give some introductory slides, and yeah, and then I'll pass it over to Ariel.
Yeah, thanks, John, and good to see everybody. Thank you for joining. I'll just confess right off the bat, I grew up in the 70s, so my family drove everywhere. So I'm well, a bit of a nerd around infrastructure and super excited to be here. I think I suspect Ariel will agree with this too. We need more young people. We need more backgrounds in transportation and infrastructure discussion. So this is great to be part of this. And if I don't get a chance to say it during the course of the conversation, I would love to hear from any of you. I failed, and I put together a couple of slides in my introduction, and I failed to give all my contact information, but I'll put it in the chat. John and Eddie both have it too, so I'm an open book. Just feel free to grab a hold of it. Let me go ahead. It seems a little silly throwing up the slides, but let me go ahead and throw it up there just to give a couple of visuals and context to who I am and what we're working on in Arizona. So can you guys see can you see my slides? Let me go ahead. So as you can see, I've actually spent, I'm dating myself, I've spent a couple of years working on trade and transportation policy around the border, which actually surprisingly a lot of people don't think about it, but it does require not only just infrastructure improvements, but technology process improvements around how do you facilitate our trade relationships, and in my context around Mexico and Canada. But more recently in 2018, the governor Arizona stands out, and we're so grateful for Waymo because they've just been such a leader in this space, and they've been just such a great corporate sponsor in Arizona to have quite a bit of automated testing happening in our state. In fact, it's often forgotten that Arizona, largely because of our heat, we've had a lot of automotive innovation taking place because of that. We've got a number of OEMs that have proving grounds. Our military concentrations also created a great wealth of engagement around that space. So in 2018, as I was mentioning, the governor established this Institute of Automated Mobility, and he put it in Commerce, which may seem a little peculiar, but the content was that we were bringing in ADOT and others, and if we could figure out the safety, we expected that some of the great economic development opportunities that are being forecasted would come to fruition. And so we're frankly incubating this institute, and I'm the executive director for it. And so I'll get a little bit more into those details here. So just to be slightly provocative, I mean, I guess some of the things that we're thinking about relative to automated vehicles is just this patchwork that's happening out there. It's such an exciting time around automated vehicles. We'll be able to talk about really pushing the frontiers around this technology, but we're still in this liminal state right now around how do you define driving safely? What does that mean? And here, some of the challenges associated with that is that we still have a patchwork in the US, unfortunately, in which states are potentially looking at it in different ways. More importantly, and something that we'll probably continue to have to address is the fact that right now there's a lot of legal issues that are at the forefront. And that's not how you want to drive safety discussions around automated vehicles. And so we think that, and I know this was an important discussion for this group, was, partnerships can help us start to drive these conversations in a way in which there's always going to be legal contests going on about it, but there's also a large body of folks that are really focused around how do we ensure the safety, how do we ensure the efficiency to our roadway systems, so that we can start to minimize some of this being dictated by the court. And one of the things that we're really concerned about in Arizona is just this tension that happens around ensuring that the innovation itself has an opportunity to mature, get a little bit more robust, get a little bit more opportunity to get on the road, and use that to guide some of the regulatory environment that needs to take place. It's just it's a hand in glove type of scenario. And so one of the hopes that we have, and we're in conversations with a number of states, and Waymo, who is fortunate to have on this panel as well, is engaged with a number of states to really help to provide some guidance on how this technology is going to be integrated and really be pretty profound in the ways that we travel and connect with people going forward. So finally, I just wanted to talk just super quickly. We'll get more into details about this, but around the Institute of Automated Mobility, partnerships are the key. And so this starts to give you a flavor of several of the folks that are around the table for us. And I hope what gets impressed to you is that there's a diversity of entities, not only at the state level, governor's office, transportation, commerce, public safety, and the like, but also several private sector folks, several other public sector folks, infrastructure operators and owners, several emerging technology companies that are frankly focused largely on the vehicle, but are trying to think of new market opportunities around, are there ways that we can leverage infrastructure, which is kind of a unique perspective that we're trying to explore in the Institute, as well as regional transportation officials like PAG and MAG and MCDOT, who are also involved as well. So I didn't want to belabor the introduction, but just wanted to give you a flavor to kind of help guide some of the future conversations. So let me go ahead and stop sharing.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I'll toss it over to Ariel for a bit of an introduction on her end.
There we go. Didn't click hard enough. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Fleischer. Very excited to be here tonight. Zoom doesn't blur my background, so you have a glimpse of life behind me, real life. Yes, I'm going to try to share my screen real quickly and give you a quick update and some information and background about Waymo. How do I do this? Chrome tab. Sorry, hold on. Take two. Okay. Chrome tab. YPT presentation. Can hear me, huh?
Can't hear you now. Nope. There we go. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Something happens with Zoom when I share my screen, so I'm glad that worked out. Okay. So my name is Ariel Fleischer. I serve as a city policy strategist at Waymo. It's a title I made up. I'm not sure if I like it, but I've had it for now 9 months, so I should probably figure that out by now. My job, my role is to help Waymo develop policy positions on the issues that matter to cities. So things like equity, congestion, transit integration, and more. I am not an expert in safety. I am not necessarily a regulatory expert outside the city level. So I wanted to put that out there as my initial disclaimers, just so folks, just my initial disclaimers so folks know where my knowledge stops and starts. I previously was the events chair for the YPT Bay Area chapter, so definitely a big fan of YPT, and now serve on the WTS board, or I should say I'm the vice president. No, I'm not. I'm the co-chair of the WTS mentorship program. So big fan of these organizations. I'm real excited to be here. Before Waymo, I worked at SPUR, which is a local think tank here in the Bay Area, doing a lot of work on regional policy, regional transportation policy. And I also worked and I also worked at the SFMTA, where I did work on Vision Zero implementation, transportation demand management, that whole slew of work. I also did a brief stint at the Department of Public Health during early pandemic, where I'd helped develop the city's vaccine strategy and organize vaccine clinics in lower income neighborhoods. So a breadth of experience that I bring to this role and excited to speak with you all about. So I have a quick little, a few slides about Waymo and our experience. So Waymo is an autonomous driving technology company. We have a mission to make it safe and easy for people and things to move around. Fully autonomous technology, we believe, holds the promise to improve road safety and offer new mobility options to millions of people. And safety and accessibility are at the core of Waymo's values. So we call our autonomous driving the technology the Waymo driver. And we started in 2009 as the Google self-driving project and became Waymo a standalone company in 2016. So for more than a decade, we've put our technology through the world's longest and toughest ongoing driving test. So it's about 20 million miles on public roads, 20 billion miles in simulation across 25 cities in the US. So safety and accessibility, as I mentioned, are at the core of what we do. Driving today, as many folks know, is not as safe as it could be. And so the Waymo driver is never distracted, never intoxicated, improving road safety, not just for those inside the vehicle and outside as well. I like to say that a big part of our value proposition is that as a result of our technology, we want to see more people biking and walking. I know that I work for this company, so I rarely have to hop in an AV, so I can put my bike and we can bike everywhere we go. And that's part of our vision, is this idea of safer streets for everyone. We've done a lot of crash simulations that I won't get into to understand the safety of our technology, again, in part just because it's not my wheelhouse. Another big piece of the work we do is accessibility, and I'm consistently really impressed by the breadth and incredible work that the company does in accessibility to ensure that our product is available and accessible to people with disabilities. We have a lot of in-car and mobile features for blind and hearing impaired riders. We do a lot of inclusive wayfinding, sounds, like can you, to alert you to the car will ping at you, just really unique and interesting ways in which we're ensuring that our vehicles are accessible to people with disabilities. So something that has consistently impressed me at Waymo, like I said, is the commitment of the company to the accessibility features. Like I said, we have an accessible app that supports screen reading. We have educational ride hailing tips in our app that explain what to do before and after. Deaf users can call our rider support team with a chat feature instead of a voice call. We have braille buttons in many of the cars. So lots and lots and lots of features that we do to ensure our service and product are available to people with low incomes, and to people with disabilities. And we're always iterating on that as well, learning how we need to, what changes need to come to our vehicles. For example, I'm going on, but we had a conversation this morning about how our external speakers on our cars aren't actually loud enough to support a lot of these bings and that we want to do to alert people with disabilities. So how do we take these learnings and fold them into new iterations of our car? So really interesting work here. We are in Chandler, Arizona. We offer the world's first fully autonomous service with 100% of rides with no human driver. And in 2021, we started our trusted tester program in San Francisco to learn how to operate in a dense urban environment. So that's happening right now in San Francisco with it's a small research focused program with the idea of collecting learnings from a diverse group to understand how the general population experiences our technology and how to build a product and a service that works for everyone. So with that, I can open it up and toss it back for questions.
Great. Let me get everyone. Perfect. Okay. So I'll kick off the kind of our Q&A session. If anyone has questions that come up during the course of our conversation, please drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and if we have time, we'll definitely include as many of them as possible. So a little bit of context. This is a part of a larger series put on by YPT International and these new regions across the organization. So this is the second of sorry, I'm distracted by people coming in. So this is the second in the series. The other one was on the Eastern Seaboard, so now we're on the West Coast. So the question that I want to start with, well, in kind of general, is why are we even talking about AVs and urban and street design? Obviously, if you all are here, you have some familiarity or curiosity around the topic. This is a very niche topic at the moment. I myself am not an AV policy expert, but I am interested in the shape of streets, and that's kind of where my research in grad school kind of centered around. And I also have a general curiosity about what the opportunities around AVs will give us going forward. I will start with a little bit of an anecdotal story on my end, as even though I'm a planner, I consider myself a layman when it comes to actual AV and AV policy. So this last weekend, I went and visited family in Oregon, and my brother-in-law, who works for SpaceX, has a Tesla, and a part of their program with their engineers is they basically have given them the beta of the autonomous driving that no one else can get. So they had to go through a process of rating their driving over the course of 2 months, and they were either deemed, yes, you can have this, or not. And so last weekend, my brother-in-law said, hey, I know you have that AV event coming up. Do you want to try it? I haven't tried it yet. I got it a couple months ago, and I just haven't had the courage to try it yet. And so we drove around, Oregon residential streets. If any of you are from the Northwest, you kind of understand the kind of rural town. There's streets that were built in the 1970s. They're a little squirrely, a little grittish, lots of turnarounds and no lines on the streets, and lots of cars parked on the sides. So my notes going through this process of driving in this quote unquote autonomous vehicle was, it felt like it was trying to adhere to the rules of the road, but it would drive very uncomfortably close to parked cars. And for me, it felt like driving with a student driver who knew every rule front and back, but it didn't have any consideration for how passengers felt. So low emotional intelligence, if you will. And even my brother-in-law at the end was like, it kind of feels like a party trick right now, and not something I would ever use every day at this point. It comes in handy on highways at high speeds. He said in the past that it feels like you're, instead of doing the homework, you're checking the homework, so less driver fatigue, which is great. But as far as the residential, even slow streets, it was an experience, and we came very close to a lot of cars. So that being said, coming from like the commercial side, my first kind of question on our list is, we've been talking about AV technology for decades. In fact, I had a conversation with a colleague on the East Coast recently, and I mentioned this event, and he was like, we're still talking about AVs, and he's a planner. So I guess my first question is why should we even be talking about it right now?
I mean, I would say that, we should be talking about it because you have many companies actively working, and there are AVs on the streets of San Francisco and Arizona. It's real. It's happening, but there are cars out there. There are cities, there are states. The federal government is trying to wrap their heads around this, but it is very good to keep this top of mind, because the more top of mind it is, the more policymakers have an opportunity to influence the outcomes towards whatever it is that they want. So I think it would be perilous to ignore what is actively happening. Cruise, Waymo, Zoox, there are many companies doing this work. And that's why we need to keep it at the forefront of our understanding.
And I suspect, John, we're going to probably potentially get into this conversation. There's incredible aspirations around what AVs are going to, how they're going to revolutionize the way we move. And so it's going to be critical to continue those conversations so that we can help shape that. I also think, one of the things with this technology, it's hard. It takes time. Some of the greatest minds are dedicating their lives to this right now. And we're just at such an incredible inflection point right now. In deference, Ariel, I know a lot of the folks that are in the space have said, and I get this. Look, if we had to rely on the infrastructure, they would be waiting forever, right? Plus, there's also cybersecurity issues and different things like that. But I think we're at such an interesting point in the conversation where there's a dialogue that's happening. I'm seeing it in Arizona, thanks to Waymo too. They've just been such a leader in this space as well. Just to start saying, hey, look, infrastructure takes forever to be able to advance, to develop, to plan, to execute. Let's start having conversations with folks. Let's start thinking, look, we know at the very basic level, we'd like good markings, we'd like good road systems, but yeah, let's start having a conversation, because frankly, I think what we're finding is that a lot of the things that probably move, I know they do move, automated vehicles around artificial intelligence, computer vision, machine learning, a lot of these emerging technologies right now actually have very upfront benefits to the infrastructure, regardless about automated vehicles, because frankly, folks like Waymo and others are just doing a tremendous job of working on their systems, making sure they're the safest that they can be. But there's also this opportunity for us to start thinking about the infrastructure. How can we add technology to our infrastructure that hopefully maybe over time benefits the AVs? But regardless of that, it enhances safety for human drivers, which frankly, I had a car for 20 years, so I'm dating myself. There's going to be probably folks like me that have a vehicle. We're going to be driving cars for a long time. We're going to be increasingly integrating with automated systems, ADS systems over time. And are there ways that we can leverage the infrastructure to make it more efficient, to make it more safe? So I think this is just a long-term conversation, and I have to tell you, I'm quite excited about the opportunity to be involved in just what seems to be an emerging community. And we think of it often just in the United States, but frankly, it's a global conversation. There's just a lot of interesting discussions that are going on in this topic right now.
That is an excellent segue into my next question. So, how could AV technologies change the urban landscape in the future, and not to at all leave out the rural landscape either, because it's a different environment, but it's still going to be relevant.
Look, Ariel, I would love to defer to you on this, in the sense that I'll be candid. I've seen a lot of really interesting efforts. You know, our colleagues up in Michigan, who we are just such amazing admirers of some of the work that's going on up there, have been exploring, for instance, dedicated lanes and different things like that. I guess, and I just want to be transparent. I just worry that if you have to create a dedicated lane for automated vehicles to be traversing, I'm just not sure how we're going to get to a good fresh point on integration. I just feel like, and I suspect our folks, both in the typical OEMs and ADS environment, feel like, you know, we've got to figure out how these vehicles just get integrated in the roadway that we have existing. Because and you know, we're all excited because the IIJA passed in November, but you know, usually there's 7 to 8 years that pass before each infrastructure bill. So I think the challenge really is to kind of figure out, how do we integrate this without having to completely revamp the infrastructure. It might be a little bit more retrofitting, although I think in certain contexts, and I'll be honest with you guys, I'm learning every day. So I'm sure there's contexts where there's unique infrastructure assets that get developed to facilitate this. And particularly, I think a lot with these vehicles, pick up and drop off, there's a lot of discussion around what that infrastructure needs to look like. But I think overall, I think we want to try to be prudent about what do we have already, and how does that work with integrating this technology into the roadways already. But I'm ready to stand corrected, both from the participants and Ariel as well too.
No, I appreciate that. Our technology doesn't need anything special. We don't need special roads or this or that in order to be able to in order to be able to drive to work. We drive on the same roads and in Chandler, in San Francisco, that other cars do. There are things that certainly make it easier for us, like dedicated pickup and drop off zones, but they also are things that make it easier for cities to help organize the orchestra that's happening on their streets. And if you guys can indulge me, if I can do this, let's see if this works. I'm not muted again. If you can see my screen.
Yes.
You can see my screen. Great. I can't see you seeing my screen, so we're going to go with that. But this is just like I pulled a bunch of headlines from, I was doing a panel exactly on this, like how will EVs impact cities? There's like self-driving cars will stop the urban meltdown, ignore them, they won't do anything. They're going to redefine urban space. They're going to be a game changer. They're going to transform how our cities look. And so there's just so much to think about when it comes to how AVs may not, will, could impact the urban landscape. And I think it's assumed that AVs will impact cities and in rural areas for that matter in a myriad of ways, from safety, that it's premised on a few ideas, the impacts that EVs will have, and the ideas that they're safe, they're affordable, convenient, electric, and shared. And that's where these ideas come from. And the way I think about it is there can be these very practical, almost banal ways that AVs can impact cities, these bold, these potentially revolutionary ways that AVs may impact cities. And then there's a series of things that are unknown. So the practical being like, AVs can help get people where they need to go on a very simple level. They're a transportation, a means. And in the more bold space, you see things like I was talking about with safer streets, like more people biking and walking as a result of our technology, helping to fill transit gaps, solving the first last mile challenge, augmenting or replacing paratransit, for example. There's all these potential really bold applications. It could be a catalyst for major urban transformation. If the lanes can be more narrow because AVs can move closer together, suddenly you have a lot of land and a lot of space that can be repurposed for bikes, for walking, for parks. So you can potentially see an entire reimagination of the urban landscape as a result of this. But again, this is on that bold spectrum. And so the way I think about it is, and again, there are these unknowns. What will happen with induced demand, more car trips, for example? Will we see sprawl? There are all these things that we just don't know. And so the way I think about the impact on cities, on rural environments, is that the AV story is yet to be written, and it's going to be shaped by choices. And those are the choices of cities, of states, of the federal government, and those of AV companies themselves. What choices will we make? And those will inevitably be influenced by cities, states, and the federal government. So again, this whole practical, bold question mark, this whole slew of impacts that could happen, and the choices that are made by the governments will really dictate, and the companies will really dictate these outcomes.
Yeah, I do think about things like parking, how that Ariel's kind of mentioned that in her conversation. I guess one of the things that I'll be candid that I'm struggling with is, and it's less actually about automated vehicles and more about a cultural this side of the Mississippi, which is this issue that frankly, there's so many exciting discussions that are going on around creating an experience in the automated vehicle. And I will be candid with you. I'm the person that orders a lift and I don't do a shared lift. I do a singular lift. And oftentimes, because I'm on this side of the Mississippi, when I do drive, although I'm in a space right now where mostly everything's walking, I got my doctor, my optometrist, folks that are pretty close to me. But I do worry about a scenario where, frankly, you could, if we don't start having these conversations from a design and urban and social perspective, you could see bumper to bumper traffic on our roadways, right? Because it would play into a scenario where folks get into your automated vehicle and it's not unlike what's happening today already, which is bumper to bumper traffic because we don't share a ride. And it's very complicated. I'll be candid. I'm a female, obviously. And so there's some safety implications about sharing a ride with somebody I don't know and different things like that. So I do think there's some of these kind of questions that need to be thought about going forward, because that's unsustainable, right? We don't want to add congestion, and we're going to have to get creative about how we start to address that conversation.
Yeah, we're in the middle of putting together a passenger safety plan to address just that. And there is a lot of fear around being in a car with no one else, with other people. How does that work? At least the driver presumably provides a buffer right now. So how do you navigate that situation is definitely something that is definitely top of mind for the company. Something that we think about at Waymo is how do we contribute to the efficient and equitable use of city streets? So things like transit integration. These are all, I would say, conceptual at this point. These are all on my to-do list, which is very long.
Yeah, for sure.
But you know, we know these are priorities to cities. So what does it look like to put them into practice? And yeah, so thinking again about what does it look like in a very much exploratory phase. I think it's important to keep in mind Waymo is small. Like the amount of trips that we're doing in comparison to an Uber and Lyft is minuscule. So in many ways, the expectations on companies are here, which is good because I guess you want to have the pressure and to understand what is expected of you, but we're really here. So it's hard for me to convince my company that we need to do things that we don't have a staff for because we're not here, if that makes sense. So right now, a lot of our work is focusing on building the case to do things like to put in place features that can support city goals around, you know, efficiency, with the understanding of where we actually are in the life cycle of our product.
Excellent. My next question, and this is related, what are the major issues related to AVs, the urban environment, and equitable design as we have the chance to possibly rethink our streets, if you will? Of course, it's always easier to get funding for the shiny new thing in the room, and it's historically been cars anyway. What do we need to be doing to be thinking about being inclusive of the AV vehicle, the bicycle, the pedestrian, the active mobility, any other cool things that might pop up in the next decades? What are steps that we need to be taking to ensure that equity?
So I know that Waymo and members of the IM are part of an SAE V2V task force, and we're contributing to this conversation. There's no consensus around what is safe enough, and what are the metrics. We see some of our colleagues, and I totally get why they're doing this, the inclination, that are looking at metrics like disengagements. And I understand disengagements are part of a larger conversation about how do we evaluate automated systems. But they really actually tell you so little. They tell you something, they just don't tell you probably enough to truly make evaluations. So I think there's an earnest global effort, and we're part of this conversation that's trying to understand what data matters and in what context does it matter. I think I saw someone in the chat that was like, what technology would make a difference in infrastructure? And let me just couch to say that from the technologists, and apologies, Ariel, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think, you know, Waymo has been very thoughtful, and others too. It's not just Waymo that are like, you know, look, we're very dedicated on our system. We're putting an incredible amount of redundancy in our system so that we've got, you know, LiDAR and cameras and different other sensors there that are going to give us that perception to be able to navigate. And they've got a terrific record around that. But we're, from a state perspective in Arizona, and there's other states, we're not unique this way, that are also looking at, again, not only because we're trying to short term or midterm, but also when you're starting to see various systems, so not just Waymo, but Waymo with others that are going to start coming online, integrating more and more with human drivers. Are there ways that we can get better situational awareness just using technology that we already have? on our infrastructure. So many of you are probably aware we've got tons of cameras out there that are helping to make greater efficiency and safety in traffic. Are there ways that those monocular cameras can be used, particularly if we added AI, because many of them are being used in the transportation operations centers to help be incredibly effective on a reactive sense to when an accident happens, but could we apply again some of these technologies that would help us predict an incident, predict an accident? So there's a tire on the road. Help us do that, because if you've ever been to a traffic operations center, lots of incredible data feeds coming in, a few humans typically that are sitting looking at a Star Trek scene of cameras. No way that you're going to be able to digest that information in a predictive way around it. So how do we kind of get ahead of that? I think there's also just a general need to explore what's going to be needed over time. We know the bare minimum that's going to be needed, and that's just having every car, regardless if it's automated or being driven by human, needs to be able to avoid potholes. They're going to need to have good lane markings. They're going to need to have good signage. But as we go through this process and you get into more complex operational domain scenarios like work zones, where those are constantly flexing, you're constantly in a situation where you're going to have to navigate on the fly. Similarly, when you have an accident, not caused by an AV, but just an accident that happens, and then an AV or human driver comes up, how are we communicating with these vehicles to make sure that they navigate, whether, again, it's a human driver or a system? How does a police officer or some first responder be able to navigate? And I'll be candid with you, Waymo's been really leading the way. I still have first responders in the state of Arizona that are reflecting back on many of the events that Waymo put together to kind of introduce them to their systems, also help them understand the manual, so to speak. This is how our system works. This is how you need to interact with our system. Here's the individuals that you call as well if there's ever an issue. So being very responsive that front. So anyway, John, I apologize if I may not have answered the question, but just a couple of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. A little scattered, but that is something actually we think about as we're mapping in cities. Like, for example, in SF, we have a very good record of potholes. So how do we share that information with the city? What is the best way to get that information across, given that we collect that data on a day-to-day basis? So we were doing a little bit of work on that as well. We also have a rider support system, and a customer service number. So when there are issues, folks can give us a call, whether that's to praise our driving or to let us know if there are any issues in their community, any issues they're experiencing with the Waymo driver. When it comes to equity, the way I think about it is I think about the picture with the 3 people in the boxes and the fence, which I know has its shortcomings, but there's a lot of talk I find about equity in AVs, that AVs will do this. They'll reduce inequities because of transit. They'll provide great access for low-income communities. And I think equity takes action. So I'm not just assuming that because we have AVs on our streets, we're going to achieve equitable outcomes. And that's the company's take as well. So I think of it again as those boxes. What are those boxes? What are those boxes that we're putting in place in order to ensure that we do, in fact, see equitable outcomes for our service? And the framework we use comes from the advocacy group Transform, is around access, awareness, and usage. So can people of communities of color, low-income communities use our technology? Is it affordable? Do they have the right payment mechanisms? Are they aware of it? Are they do they know it exists? Are they comfortable with it? Do they have concerns about the technology? And finally, usage. Do we see gaps in usage? Do we see equivalent usage? Do we see equivalent ETA, uptimes, all these things? So as I mentioned before, we are here in our journey of commercialization, but these are all the puzzle pieces that I'm working really hard at the company to put in place so that when we are here, we have a plan, and we're a company that is, we have the right boxes around access, awareness, and usage to make sure that our to ensure that our technology is the result of our technology is an advance in equity. And again, not just assuming that by putting autonomous vehicles out on the streets that there will be transportation equity.
Great. I think I'm going to try to.
Ariel, it's a
Oh,
heavy
go ahead.
lift, right? Because we don't have a lot of equity in our current transportation system. So, solving the equity issue is just, it's a Herculean effort, really, because it requires in so many things, not just in this technology, but just in our transportation, in our mobility focus, almost reinventing the way we think about access. Yeah, it's there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And sorry, I just saw the question in the chat around how we've been increasing pedestrian traffic. So again, like literally the reason I work for Waymo is so my daughter and I, when we're both not under the weather, we bike everywhere. That's my jam. And it's terrifying. I have like a 2-year-old on the back of my bike. Sometimes I wonder what the hell I'm doing. And so if I lived in a world of bike lanes, of reduced speed limits, of AVs, I would absolutely we would bike and walk more. And I think that's the idea, that if we start to see safer streets, which AVs are ideally a critical component of, that we're going to start to see people feel more comfortable biking and walking, people who are currently more nervous to do so. The other side of that is, yeah, you may see people hopping in cars, but you may see people like me who are not really car people, who will relish the opportunity to hop on their bike or hop on their feet without that safety concern.
Yeah, that's really excellent, because safety is such a, especially when looking at active transportation, biking, walking, it's all about that perception of safety, and if it's not there, people are not going to use those methods, and then that drives people back into vehicles. And I wonder if that's actually kind of connected to this next thought. You mentioned talking about traffic and induced demand. I'm kind of thinking about the other side of that pendulum swing is, should we be designing for, I don't know, induced demand from hell, because all these AVs are, parking may become a thing of the past, and you'll just have thousands of AVs circling a city. I'm thinking about a Portland or Seattle, just going on the highways constantly. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and which direction should we be designing our cities for?
What I'd say to that is, like I said, it comes down to choices. So if cities are concerned about the impact of AVs, I'm pulling up my little notes here, but cities are concerned about the impact or induced demand, like cities have levers. And I think that's really important to notice. Like they can, many cities have their regulatory powers are limited by the federal and state government, but they can still impact AV outcomes. So they control the right of way, and they can make decisions regarding curb loading zones and how street space is allocated. So to bikes, to transit, pedestrians, cities can levy fees and taxes. Cities can also impact AV outcomes by being open and curious, and being willing to collaborate and partner with AV companies. And they could subsidize or invest in AVs that meet a variety of unmet mobility needs, like paratransit or transit desert. So again, I think it comes down to cities' choices. I think the number one thing I can say to folks who work for cities is the importance of having an open and curious attitude. That does not mean a red carpet. Waymo, no company deserves a red carpet in a city, but an open and curious attitude to what could be feasible. And I think also, last thing I'll say is it comes down to, sticks and carrots. So how could cities incentivize a company like Waymo? I have to build a business case. So I have to build a business case to say that we should reposition our vehicles around transit stops. And so I need to know, I need proof points that's more, that there's value to that, as opposed to having folks work on a feature about music in cars, which clearly I think my idea is better. But we need to feel from cities that there is as much the juice is worth the squeeze, essentially. And so if we're trying to meet cities' expectations and outcomes, how do they meet us halfway at that table? But again, I think it comes down to choices. What choices are cities going to make with the levers that they have, and how will that influence what the built environment looks like?
Marissa, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that or not. Okay. I have a bit of a technical question. This came out in my own life in the last week, especially having spent some time with my brother-in-law and his Tesla and all that. I'm really curious, and I don't know if this is even the right crowd to talk to about this, but I think it's really interesting. Thinking about AV technology as it starts to be adapted into vehicles. So again, thinking about a Tesla. Right now, a big equity barrier is you have to be able to buy a Tesla. So there's that. And then the other factor is, even if you want the AV technology, it's an additional $10,000 on top of the cost of the car. So theoretically, a better way to go would be, to provide AV subscriptions or something like that. Now, of course, Ariel, you're working with a service that's trying to provide, a blend, more coverage and I assume you would use some sort of subscription service. I don't know. But I'm really curious about your thoughts about, what kind of business models might work in going into the future. Should we be placing a lot of that focus into transit or private companies that will provide the service, or looking at those private companies and the private vehicle and the private subscriptions, and kind of thinking about the tension between those two things? Or, of course, the other option is, yes, we have to think about all of that at the same time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Well, I guess I'll just say from my perspective, generally speaking, although I know that there's a beta around level 3 with Tesla, it's a level 2. And I think there's some real value around increase ADAS technology that's going to help people drive smarter. It can be slightly annoying. You're verging into the lane, you're getting these beeps and whistles about this, but really ways that start to acclimate people to using the roadways safer, I think is going to be really helpful. But, we started out this conversation about, particularly, again, this side of the Mississippi, and I apologize, I don't know where everybody is located relative to this conversation, but I'm hopefully really encouraged by the potential around subscription services and using robo-taxis, because I want more people to share the road. I want less people driving their own vehicle, and we're not going to dictate that. That's going to be a personal choice, and how that actually plays out. I'm really intrigued. Waymo has started now a freight service. They started, I could be wrong, Ariel, on how the trajectory, I'm sure there was a lot of parallel around the research that was going on, but obviously it came out really strong on the robo-taxi, which is very exciting. I think personally, not having a crystal ball into this, I think there's just an incredible potential around freight movements, being able to optimize our roadway systems at times that maybe aren't as conducive for human drivers, driving at night, driving in certain weathers, different geographies, different things. And frankly, most truck drivers are starting to see the data, the whole idea of the value of being a long haul driver it just doesn't carry the same kind of appeal that it used to. Most people want a shorter trajectory so they can have time with the family and quality of life issues. And so I could see this freight space around automated vehicles just being incredibly productive for the whole system, as we continue to figure out how do you navigate unique terrains like urban environments where there's just so many different challenges associated with that. So I see a lot of promise with this, and we've got one of our partners is Cox Automotive, and in the EV space, they've been looking quite aggressively around providing subscription services to folks that could get access to vehicles in ways that they want vehicles. I mean, I could see a situation where having your own vehicle doesn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly in an urban environment. Now, there's a lot of different questions that arise in the rural environment, but I think the future looks quite interesting going forward on how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the word I keep thinking of is potential. I mean, like I said, we are early in our stages, but there is a lot of potential. There's a lot of, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this and that. And so what does it make sense to do at this phase that's how we think of it, what does it make sense to do it at this phase in our technology? But that's what makes me so excited for the company is all the potential and everything that is feasible and where we can go from here.
Well, I think that's a really great place to end. We're up against the hour. I really hope this conversation was helpful for those of you who attended. It was really fun to be able to interact in this way. A big thank you to Marissa and Ariel for giving their time to do this. It was really great. And yeah, I guess I'll release everyone back to their respective things. And yes, go ahead.
Yeah, John, just a quick mention. I realized I wasn't able to monitor the chat as probably effectively. I'm not that great a multitasker apparently, but I know that there were some questions that came in that were incredibly thoughtful as I'm looking at them right now and didn't get a chance to respond. I wish I had the foresight like Ariel to be involved in this organization earlier on. I'm an open book. Please share any of my contact information. Again, apologies. I've been doing presentations for quite a while and didn't have the thought to put in a slide with my contact information. But John, please feel free to share it with anyone that participated. I'd be delighted to carry on the conversation. And also, you know, we're an open book in Arizona around our institute. Love to have folks join, be part of the conversation. So if you're inclined, please reach out. And Ariel, pleasure to meet you. Eddie, nice to meet you. John, a pleasure to meet you. And gratitude to everybody for attending today.
Yeah, likewise. Feel free to reach out with questions, comments, concerns. Happy to keep the conversation going.
Yes, and feel free to reach out to me. I put my email in the chat. If you want their contact information, let me know and I'll send it on.
Great. Take care, everyone.
All right, thank you.